Welcome back to the Triple Threat Podcast. My name is Ishan Sheth. Alongside me is William Ishan. And today we are finally into the top 10 for our running back rankings. This episode we have 10 through 6. Next episode we'll do 5 through 1. So this will be a pretty fun list. We have some Pro Bowlers and some young studs. And if you like our content, be sure to subscribe. Make sure to check out all the other running back rankings. And make sure to stay tuned for our receiver rankings and all of the offensive and defensive positions. So starting off at number 10, we have Saquon Barkley. As talented of a player as he is, it's just a lot of health problems for him. He had limited games last season, and then this season, he played like
2 games, 1.5 basically.
2 games. Yeah, 1.5 games. So from a pure talent perspective, would you have Barkley in the top 5?
If you're telling me the Saquon Barkley coming out of college, I'd say so. He is a very talented player. I just question about how his injury affects his athleticism, because that's been his greatest strength. If you look at Saquon Barkley, a lot of his plays, he relies a lot on explosive plays, the 60-yarders, the 50-yarders, and I just worry that he won't be able to have that breakaway ability to be able to get those explosive plays. Because we see a lot of the times with Saquon, it's a lot of like 2-yard, 3-yard gains, 60-yard gain, 2, 3. Like, he really is reliant on those big plays to make him such a great running back. And I know he's not just a runner, he's also a really good receiver, but I just worry about how his injury will affect his athleticism and ability to make those breakaway plays.
Mm-hmm. He's a very elusive running back, number one. And then he is very athletic. He is strong. He's agile. He's pretty fast too. I think his combine, if I remember, was something else. He killed it there. So when you have a lot of injuries, especially at this age, and the position that he's playing, running back, and especially with this bad of an offensive line, it kind of raises a lot of questions about his future. And it really shows that as talented of a prospect as Saquon was coming out of college, it's not always the best idea drafting a running back over potential quarterback candidates, defensive studs, and offensive linemen. Because the next guys that went on the board were Darnold, Denzel Ward, Bradley Chubb, and Quentin Nelson. And Ward, Chubb, and Nelson look like perennial Pro Bowlers.
And Nelson will contribute as much to the run game as Saquon can, just because how influential he can be.
Mm-hmm. So I think that they made their mistake, but he still is a talented player. And even with the injuries, the fact that he's in the top 10 speaks of how talented this guy is.
Yeah, so let's get a little bit into the metrics, but I did want to say the best ability that a running back can have is availability. So I think that I'm having him this high probably because of that rookie season, that 2,000-yard all scrimmage. That was just an incredible year.
Yeah.
Even in 2019, when he played 13 games, I mean, albeit a lot of it was banged up, he ranked as a slightly above average running back. He had a DVOA of .004, so not a lot of impact as a running back. He didn't have a great O-line, as we've talked about, but it's gotten a lot better. Kevin Zeitler, Andrew Thomas, Will Hernandez, and then they did bring in Nate Solder. I mean, he hasn't been great, but he's there. I think he opted out of this season though. He didn't have a great offensive line. His yards before contact were 1.8, so he wasn't getting a lot of holes or open space behind the offensive line. His talent showed 2.8 yards after contact, very impressive. I think that was top 5 in the league in 2019. But he's a very inconsistent runner, as I mentioned. He gets stopped by a lot of great Ds. 8 carries for 10 yards against Tampa last season, 5 for 6 against Pittsburgh this season. I mean, his talent is unquestionable, but he's so reliant on those big plays. I just worry about how that explosion affects him. And then a receiver, a really versatile weapon. But as we talked about, a lot of the times offensive line can make a running back look a lot better than they are. Look at Dallas, how effective running backs can be in systems like that. And then PFF wizards, the analytic people will tell you never take a running back this high. Look at James Robinson, incredible season. Probably deserved to be above Saquon Barkley into the top 10. But you can just look at these metrics. Any running back can do well with, well, a lot of running backs can do well with just a lot of touches, a lot of usage, and just overall being in a good fit. So we've seen you don't have to even draft a running back to get a capable one, get one taking one number two. So overall,
Yeah,
he's a good running back, but definitely not worth that pick.
yeah, and I think that they were in a bit of a tough situation there because just the season before they had that collapse, they were a playoff team, but then Eli regressed. There was OBJ, and I think that they had the idea of adding another offensive weapon to kind of take the pain to take the load off of Eli and make another playoff push was the idea, but that didn't really pan out too well. They ended up taking Daniel Jones the very next year.
Yeah, they could have had Josh Allen that year too. Like you look at what they could have had. They could have had Lamar Jackson. So over Daniel Jones, I think we would take either of those. And they also could have had
Mm-hmm.
Josh Rosen too, and we'd take Daniel Jones over Josh Rosen any day. So that just shows
Yeah.
you the crapshoot that the NFL draft is.
Yeah. So moving on to number 9, we have a guy that was not selected at pick number 2, but selected in the third round. I want to say
I don't know if it was second or third.
second or third. Yeah, somewhere in the mid rounds. But someone that's kind of broken out a little bit, especially later on in the season, David Montgomery. Tell me about him as Chicago. Tomorrow could actually sneak into the playoffs, and tell me about his impact on the team.
He's been very impressive going down the stretch of the schedule. You could argue that that might be a little bit of a schedule mismatch and how he's had a very easy end of the season. But what I would look at is just the change in offensive philosophy this team's had over the past couple of weeks and how they've really changed their system with Mitch Trubisky and become much more effective offense because of it. I mean, yes, they didn't play good teams, Detroit, Houston, Minnesota, Jacksonville. Those are some of the worst defenses in the league. But also, you have to look at what they did. Green Bay is not a bad defense. I know their run D is pretty awful, but 11 carries, 103 yards. That is super, super effective stuff. And then 40 yards in the receiving game off 5 catches. Overall, he's been able to produce and be effective in the offense, even against good teams. Against New Orleans, 21 carries, 89 yards. That's an elite defense right there. One of the best defensive lines, one of the best run stuffing defensive lines in the entire league. So I don't think that a lot of his late season production has been because of the easy schedule, but still incredible stuff into the season. Averaging over 5 yards a carry. A lot of that's inflated because the Houston game is 11 carries, 113 yards. But 300-yard games in the past 5 weeks. One of them was at 95, and the other one was at 72. Really effective stuff. 6 touchdowns in the last 4 weeks, just rushing. So overall, he's just been incredibly effective in the latter end of the season. I know his stats are kind of misleading because he's
Mm-hmm.
fourth worst in success rate, but he's second in broken tackles, best broken tackle rating in the league. He's 10th best in yards after catch per reception of any running back, fourth in receiving broken tackles, fourth in receiving first downs. So he's influential in the offense and the running game and the receiving game, and has been instrumental to this offensive explosion that they've had. He is the number one weapon on the team. Allen Robinson's really effective too, but you're relying on the quarterback too when talking about Allen Robinson. So maybe if you had a better quarterback, he'd be the offensive focal point. But Montgomery has been the key to this offensive success. His explosion. I was super high on him coming up Iowa State. He disappointed me. I drafted him in fantasy last season, and then I kind of got fantasy burned and didn't want to take him this season. But he's been a stud. He's been great towards the end of the season.
Yeah, I think that the slower start and then the boom later on the season kind of shows why his advanced stats like defensive yards above replacement and DVOA and success rate, as you said, are not the best. But I think he has made a big boom, and he could be that number one guy for an offense that's starting to hit its stride. I know they've dealt with a pretty up and down season, but he's a young guy, and I feel like he'll be here to stay for a while.
And if you haven't watched any of our previous episodes, we just got to break down some of the metrics that we use. DVOA stands for defensive value above average. So that's weighing in defensive strength of just ease of defensive schedule. So if you play a lot of easy opponents, they'll be factored in. And just seeing how much of a positive you are on the offense compared to an average level player. We also like defensive yards above replacement. So that's how many more yards this player is generating above a replacement level player. Obviously, we don't really know how those are calculated because they don't tell us that, but that's what those stats mean. If anyone hasn't listened to the previous episodes, because we use those stats a lot.
Yeah. So moving on to a guy that's kind of flown under the radar in my eyes, especially given how his team kind of had a bit of a slump after 5 games. But Chris Carson, how instrumental is he to Seattle's offense? Because a lot of that credit goes to Russell Wilson, which he deserves. But Chris Carson kind of flies under the radar with guys like Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and Wilson.
I mean, he's been instrumental. And I think that you don't have to look further than the games he's missed and what that's meant for the offense. You look at those games where Russ is cooking. Well, they're cooking because he's been able to establish at least some presence in the run game and been able to scare defenses enough where they can't just go, all right, run on us. We don't really care. Travis Homer is not a good running back. Um, Carlos Hyde's not a good running back. We don't care. We'll just sit back, play coverage, and then won't be able to hit us over the top of the deep ball because we'll play two high safeties. So what he does in changing the defensive alignment and making more pass favorable setups, or also punishing in the run game, has been really influential for this team. And that's why his yards per attempt is so incredibly high. Almost five on the season, 4.6 on his career. He's been able to feast in the run game, and when he's cooking and scaring defenses with his ability, like he doesn't even need touches. Like he just needs to be able to have the threat of running to be able to punish defenses. So when he can scare a defense with his running ability, he opens up so much for the offense. He is 14th in defensive yard above replacement. He's got the highest success rate of any running back in the league. Success rate is basically taking a play. So say you're on 1st and 10, a successful play would be gaining 3.5 yards because 3 plays of 3.5 yards would be a first down. If you're 2nd and 8, you need 8 yards for a first down. An 8-yard run would be successful, 7 wouldn't be. So basically, if you're on track to get a first down, that's a successful play. So he's first in that. That's a really effective metric in gauging success. His receiving, he's lowest in yards after catch per reception of anyone on this list, but he's being targeted down the field more often at an average depth of throw at 1.5, which is one of the highest of any running backs. He's 3rd receiving touchdowns. He's effective in the receiving game, and his running ability just opens up so much for this offense. And again, another example of why you don't need to take running backs high. He's a 7th round draft pick. And a lot of these guys are pretty low draft picks, to be fair with. I think not a single 1st round pick going forward.
We have one.
Oh, Dalvin Cook. No, he's a 2nd rounder.
No, Dalvin Cook
CMC. CMC's the only 1st round.
CMC, yeah. But he's more than a running back. He's extremely versatile.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Carson, I remember the year he broke out, Seattle was number 1 in rushing, and it shows how impactful he is to this offense. And it does add another dimension because you have him. Russell Wilson can obviously penetrate defenses with his legs. And then you also have the passing game, the deep ball. So this is a really complete offense. And for a team that, for the majority of the decade, was known as, a defensive stalwart, Legion of Boom, Bobby Wagner, it's nice to see this offense kind of take over. And Chris Carson, in my opinion, is at the forefront of that with Russell Wilson.
For sure.
So moving on to another running back who is a very late round draft pick, but someone that has really thrived next to Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones. And he and the advanced metrics love Aaron Jones. And why do you think he's so good?
This was a really tough one. He probably deserves to be 6th. I have him at 7. Probably just because I'm a little bit biased on my next player, but it was a coin flip between these two guys. He should easily be able to be a 6th running back. But we've seen last week A.J. Dillon, obviously a game that Jones got a little bit banged up, and he was able to carry the load and be really effective. 24 carries, over 100 yards. I think 2 touchdowns, very effective for him. So it's a favorable system for running backs behind a really great offensive line. Bakhtiari, Lindsley, and then Elton Jenkins, 3 Pro Bowl level, all-pro level offensive linemen. Just incredible for that system. He's 5th in defensive yards per replacement and defensive value above average. He's 3rd in success rate among these 33 running backs. He's highest in yards after contact, but he's not as good before contact. He leads running backs in yards per attempt and 4th in yards per game. Great receiving ability too, 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, 74% catch percentage. He's so valuable. And then those metrics that he has are so impressive. And I think that it's really telling about how good he is, what he can do before contact, his elusiveness. But
that is a weakness of his, is his ability to do something after contact. And that's really where great running backs separate themselves, is being able to break tackles, not to be able to be elusive, but to get more out of a play when you're stopped behind the line of scrimmage, being able to get out of a defender's grasp and be able to keep going, get those extra yards on a play, being able to push the pile and be able just to get more out of a play where you're stopped on and where you shouldn't be able to get a yard, turning a 2-yard gain to a 4-yard gain. That's the difference between a great running back. But he's still third in success rate, so he's been able to be shifty because of how great that offensive line is, being able to find those open holes and break down the field with speed. But I think that a lot of his success is due to that offensive line and how good they have been. Obviously, Bakhtiari tore his ACL and he's going to be out for the season, but still, he should be able to be successful going forward. Offensive line still solid, but I think when you see how successful another running back can be in that system, and then you'll see how how ineffective he is after contact. That's why I put him at 7, but easily a top running back in the league. A 6th-round draft pick, getting a top 10 running back out of that, very impressive stuff.
Yeah.
He's been a great player.
He has been. And I think, as you were saying, yeah, the advanced metrics love him. 5th in defensive yards above replacement, 6th in DVOA, and then 6th in success rate, but there are a lot of ineligible guys there. So I think 3rd is what you said. And he has played some pretty tough defenses. Just looking at his DVOA and comparing it to his VOA, he's 10th with 13.3%, but defensive adjusted, he's 6th with 20.1%. So he's been able to do this while playing some tough defenses. You have to play the Bears 2 times every year, and they're able to play some other good defenses. So Aaron Jones is a really talented player. I think a lot of people would rather have him at 6 or maybe even see him creep into the top 5. But the guy at 6, moving on, there's a bias here. I know you love him. He was my number one running back, your number 1 running back, and he has definitely lived up to the hype and lived up to that 2nd-round pick. Jonathan Taylor, I know he has a good offensive line around him. Quentin Nelson, he's a sure thing. He helps a lot, but he's producing more than what Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines did pretty much throughout their whole careers. So what are your thoughts on Jonathan Taylor, and how does he supplement Phillip Rivers and add that extra dimension of offense? Because he is a very talented player.
Well, first thing, I wouldn't even give that offensive line too much credit. They haven't been that impressive this season in the run game at all. Where they've shined in the passing game, they have not opened up a lot of holes for Jonathan Taylor. He's not had a lot to work with in that running game, and that's something that I found a bit surprising when I was looking at a lot of the film with him, because I watch Jonathan Taylor all the time. Whenever I am on Sunday, I'm like, I'll put on the Colts game. I don't care they're playing Jacksonville. I want to go watch Jonathan Taylor. I love that guy. I think he was better than Zeke coming out. I don't think he's at the same level as Saquon coming out, but I thought he was at that same above where Zeke was coming out.
Yeah, that's 2nd tier.
6,000 yards in 3 seasons in college. I mean, just incredible stuff. And we'll talk a little bit later about his college resume coming out, but he was joint 3rd in rushing 3rd downs, despite being limited touches. Every game, he's had 40% or more snaps. He's had 833 yards on 5 yards per carry and 9 touchdowns with 0 fumbles, which was a concern of his coming out of college. So he's a running back that really relies on being able to feed or get himself into a game. He can't thrive on limited touches. He has to be able to be fed, to bring his confidence up and get into a game. Just like a Derrick Henry type. He needs to be able to get rolling because he's such a great, he's physical and elusive. I mean, he's a complete package at running back. And whenever he's been able to thrive, whenever he's been given the chance, he's really thrived. And you look at his last 5 games where he's been really given the opportunity to thrive. He's taken it. 22 rushes for 90 yards against Green Bay, 13 for 91 against Houston, 20 for 150 against Las Vegas, 16 for 83 against Houston again, and then 18 for 74 and 2 touchdowns against Pittsburgh. 5 touchdowns in 5 games, really impressive stuff, and a receiving touchdown. So overall, when he's been given the chance to thrive, he's really taken it. I think even, as I said, the run game hasn't even been that impressive for them. He has been able to do so much more than those other backs in that system. He is the highest graded rookie running back. He is the 5th highest graded rookie of any rookie. He's been incredible. And then his biggest flaw coming out was his receiving ability. people really thought that his receiving ability wasn't good. And that's the reason why he fell into the second round to pick 44. The reason people thought he wasn't that generational talent is because they thought his receiving ability was poor. He proved that wrong in the combine, but people didn't really take notice of that. He leads running backs in yards after catch per reception at 10.5. He has 0 drops in the season and is 35 of 36. Even though Nyheim Hines has been a great receiving back, I still don't get why Jonathan Taylor doesn't get more of the receiving load, because he has been incredible in his receiving snaps. He has been great in his rushing ability. He has really thrived when given the chance. He has had an impressive campaign. I would say he's had a better year than guys like James Robinson, who have had statistically a better year in terms of base rushing yards and touchdowns. I think Jonathan Taylor is an absolute stud. I think he has been proven to be well worth the draft pick. And even though people say don't take a running back in the second round, Jonathan Taylor's there. I'm taking a running back in the first round. I don't care. I love Jonathan Taylor. He has been a stud. Maybe Aaron Jones more deserving of the spot, but I love Jonathan Taylor and I couldn't help myself. So tell us a little bit more about Jonathan Taylor, because I know you love him just as much as I do.
Yeah, he is. I think just looking at his accolades and what he's done, he is one of the best players, just football players, to come out of New Jersey and then immediately making an impact in Wisconsin. He broke the freshman rushing record, Adrian Peterson's record. He had like 1,900 yards in only 13 games. And I think just since then, Washington was just giving him the ball, and he just continued to produce. And I think that at points in the college football season, he was the best running back in college football. And I think there was a 1 to 2 year span where you could justify him being the number one running back. And then just looking at, I have a scouting report pulled up to just see how he addressed the negatives that were, given to him. I think receiving consistency was a big one. He wasn't asked to be a receiver in Wisconsin, but when he did have the opportunity to receive, he didn't disappoint. It's not like he was dropping balls and he was, missing easy plays. He still played well. He just didn't have that consistency. And I think that in a really good offensive system like Indianapolis, if they keep on easing in touches, if they keep on getting him going on the receiving end, he could become a very serviceable receiving back. And then, yeah, as you said, ball security was a big issue for him. And he has no fumbles, right?
He's got 1 fumble, but no lost.
Oh, yeah. So
I think that's the case. He's had 1 fumble lost, and that was against Baltimore.
Yeah, and that's a good defense too.
And that was his only fumble, period. Like, he doesn't have any that was just like lucky and picked up by his offensive line. Like, I think that was his only like fumble, period. Yeah, that was his only fumble all year.
He's been able to stay secure. And then I think a lot of people, I'd say one of the biggest concerns that I heard was mileage. He got the ball a lot in college, kind of similar to a Derrick Henry type situation where he had a high volume, but he really proved that he's resilient and he can take the contact and he has the ability to take such a workload, especially with some of their receivers aging, with obviously Phillip Rivers having maybe a year left in the tank. He's going to be that focal point of the offense soon. And if he does grow as a receiver, which I do see happening, he can easily move into the top 5 or even top 3.
I mean, who cares about usage? I mean, he's a rookie. He's experienced. Like, what I want from a rookie is someone who's going to be able to elevate. He already has an incredibly high floor, and you only have him for 4 years on that rookie contract. I want to get the most ability out of those 4 years. He will give you the most ability in those first 4 years of any player in this draft class. I mean, period of position. In the first 4 years, a running back who's had a bunch of experience in college will be the most productive player because, one, he's NFL ready. A lot of running backs tend to be. And he has had the workload given to him. So I just don't see how that's a concern because, one, we've seen you don't need to pay a running back. You could just draft another one. I mean,
it's a very replaceable.
Very replaceable. Unless you're like a guy who can be more than a running back and is just your entire offense. And even I could still argue you could probably draft another one of those guys too. So
yeah,
one, who cares? Who cares about that usage? He's addressed the other needs. I think he's been a plus pick, and I'm so glad I have that silver prism card of his. I mean, that's
gonna appreciate. That will definitely appreciate. I think if you're a fantasy owner, I was telling everyone draft Jonathan Taylor, draft Jonathan Taylor. I think that's paid off. Don't you have him in one
I
of your
have him in every league.
Oh, gee.
Every league. I would trade up in the draft on if I could. I would have reached for him if I could. At the beginning of the season, I looked like a genius. Middle of the season, I looked like an idiot. And then at the end of the season, he won me one of my fantasy championship games, and I hope he can carry me to another one because I've got a Week 17 championship. But he has been a great draft pick in the third, fourth round.
Yeah, he has been a great player, and I think that he will be that top 3 running back. So that concludes our first installment of the top 10 running back rankings. Stay tuned for 5 through 1. We'll have that out soon too. And just to summarize, we had Saquon Barkley at 10, David Montgomery at 9, Chris Carson at 8, Aaron Jones at 7, and Jonathan Taylor at 6. So I hope you guys had a happy new year, and stay tuned and subscribe.